Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Another entry here based on your suggestions. I think this one was suggested a long time ago. I have it saved as a bookmark and I was just reviewing the information on my bookmark manager, and sure enough, there it was. I was reminded of it, and this is a very interesting incident that occurred here in the US probably around 20 years or so ago. So very interesting stuff. Also, I'll probably be making one more video for this series, and then I'll do Cryptids of the week after that. So be on the lookout for those, and then I'll just give it a rest for a couple of weeks and then go back to your suggestions. Now again, this particular cryptid or monster, most likely it's a cryptid, only had one incident, and it was back in 1994 in Oakville, Washington, and it's called the Oakville Blob, which you'll see a picture of here, or the Oakville Blobs is another variation of it. Oakville, again, is in Washington. It's a tiny, tiny town. This incident occurred back on August 7th, 1994, so just a little bit over 20 years ago. And what had happened was, at this tiny town, which had a population even now of just a couple hundred, I mean, according to Wikipedia, there's only about 600 and change people living there now. I mean, your average theater place, like let's say you're going to go see the latest Avengers movie, chances are there's going to be more people in that theater screen watching the film than there are in this town. So again, it goes to give you an idea of how tiny this particular town is. But back then, on August 7th, 1994, specifically at 3 a.m., there began a strange set of items that began falling like rain. And in fact, they covered a 20 square mile area. And people at first thought that it was just rain, naturally just something involving rain, or in some cases even hail. But curiously, it was not cold enough to be anything involving hail, and it certainly wasn't wet enough to be considered rain. So when people started looking further into it and what this was, they realized that this was something else completely different. This was some kind of gelatinous substance that nobody knew what it was. And these are people that, when you're dealing with a small, tiny town, people that are there are usually there for generations. I mean, we're talking about folks that they're there, their families before them were there, the ones before them were there. These are not the kind of people that move into these towns. Rather, they stay there over their lifetime. And in fact, if anything, most people will move out. But in this case, these people that were there all those times, all those years that they've been there, they had never seen something like this. And this happened not just that date on August 7, 1984, but it occurred over several weeks, 3 to be in fact, and people recorded that there was a total of 6 times that this occurred. Now, how strange is that? Whatever this thing was, whatever it was made of, this blob-like gelatinous substance fell, again, 6 times over those 3 weeks. And whenever it first started, in fact, the law enforcement there came across this as well. So it goes to show that it wasn't just your average folks that noticed this. No, this was actual law enforcement. In fact, you'll see a picture of it here on a windshield of a cop car. I mean, it goes to show how much of this stuff was falling. So much so that it pretty much blankets the windshield as so. There was an officer by the name of David Lacey. He was on patrol, and when he tried to turn his windshield wipers on, when he was first starting his patrol, that's when he noticed that something was smearing his glass. And so when he tried to wash it off, and he went to a gas station specifically to do so, once he was there and he tried to clean it, it wouldn't work. And so he realized, something is up. This stuff can't be that good. Let me go ahead and I'll put on some latex gloves. And then that's when he was truly starting to feel what it was. And here's what he described it. He described the substance as being very mushy, almost like if you had Jello in your hand. And then another resident by the name of Dottie Hearn stopped by his location, noticed what it was, and then they started to attract a crowd. And then that's when, for the most part, news about whatever this blob-like thing started happening. By the way, the blob-like substance, these Oakville blobs, they were described as being rice-sized blobs, whatever that means, maybe like balls of rice. the kind of stuff that one usually gets at any kind of like a China buffet place. But people that were collecting these things, they were trying to find out exactly what it was, but none of them again had any single idea. Now the bad part started happening was later on, whatever these Oakville blobs were, once they descended and then once they landed and once they stayed there for a couple of days, some of the residents actually became ill. Now, not just like lightly ill, but as the saying goes in the stories, they became violently ill. They were described as having difficulty breathing. Some experienced extreme vertigo, which is that sense of dizziness one gets whenever they're in either a really, really tall place, like high up in the sky, and then others experience some kind of blurred vision, which would seem crazy. Imagine if you had perfect 20/20 sight, and then all of a sudden, after staying in contact or in and around the area of these things, you're suddenly seeing like a drunk. Like you can't see and see far things clearly, whereas before everything was perfect. And then others described what was called an increasing sense of nausea. One of the residents there, in fact, her name was Beverly Roberts. She was the one that became extremely ill. She contracted what was considered a flu-like illness, and it didn't just last with her for a small time. No, it stayed with her for 2 to 3 months because she was in contact with these blobs. Imagine that. Imagine having the flu. Most of us have had it in the past. It just usually is a couple of days, maybe a week at most. It's the usual kind of illness where you get to ask off a couple of days from work and then come back recuperated. No, in this case, hers was not a couple of days, it was 2 to 3 months. And then the sad part was several people's pets, their dogs, their cats. Naturally, they're going to want to come in contact with these things, whatever they are. It's just their inclination. Dogs are as equally curious as cats are. And those that did, they also fell ill. But unlike the humans there in that town, no, these poor dogs and cats, they died. Their immune system just wasn't up to par to what humans are. And so because of it, whatever these blobs were, it actually killed them. So very sad stuff. You could just imagine some of those residents, how they were feeling afterward, probably locking up and trying to their pets and making sure that as these things fell down from the sky, that nothing would get in touch with their beloved pets. I would do so too. With my cat Tum Tum, I would make damn sure that nothing was surrounding my apartment complex. Not that she would step outside, but just in case, I would make sure that she would not have any sort of contact with this. One of the other people there, a lady by the name of Dottie, she was actually found sprawled on the bathroom floor. So she was another case of somebody falling violently ill, so much so that she was very, very weak but still conscious. And her daughter described her as feeling very cold, sweat drenched, and looking very pale. So this is not an easy illness, whatever people were having there. So what were these Oakville blobs? Naturally, some people collected these things, probably very carefully, and tried to send them off to certain places, tried to have them collected and sent as samples, so that way some department somewhere could try to find out what it was. Some of them sent it to the Washington State Department of Health. A lab technician, in fact, did so, and a gentleman there by the name of Mike McDowell, who was described as a microbiologist there at the Washington State Department of Health, he took care of things. He got the samples, he tested them out, tried to see what they were. And so, interesting thing that he noted was the Oakville blobs were teeming with 2 species of bacteria, is how he described it. And he was thinking that it seemed to be tied to something involving waste, like something human waste oriented. Although these findings and his conclusions, naturally people were thinking, oh, it's one of those urban legends involving airplanes, and the idea that the restrooms there, something leaks, or the airplanes naturally just dump their waste while in air. Actually, that's all urban legend type stuff, because for starters, anything involving airplanes and flights across the U.S., nobody as an airplane company is allowed to just dump waste up in the air. In fact, there's strict controls when it comes to that. They don't even have the capability to do so. The idea, though, that something could leak is possible, because naturally anything involving airplanes, if they fly tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of miles, they're not going to be in peak condition, so something could leak. And there have been reports of airplane waste, human waste from airplanes falling into cities, falling on people. But where differences start is airplanes and the waste that is combined there. Whenever people go to the bathroom on an airplane flight, for starters, everything is dyed blue. Those of you that have gone to the bathroom on an airplane, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's probably done this way because there's a whole bunch of disinfectants, and it's dyed blue to create a clear distinction that it is airplane waste. And then also, this waste, if it falls from such an altitude, it actually turns into ice, like solid ice. Those are the reports that people had where they encountered this waste falling from the sky. It's because it fell as solid ice. Not so with these Oakville Blobs. They were gelatinous. They were not solid, but they weren't ice either. They were that soft jello-like substance that I was describing earlier. So the idea that, again, it was like Mike McDowell there at the Washington State Department of Health was stating, that it could be something that's human waste related, that was somewhat discarded, the notion on there. So another microbiologist took a test, the guy by the name of Tim Davis, and he described that it actually seemed more along the lines, still human oriented, but white cell related. So not necessarily like something involving humans per se, but at least mammal oriented, where it's white cell oriented. In fact, he said that it contains cells containing nucleus within them, very, very similar to the way white cells operated. So it ties to the fact that it could have been a living creature. Now, whether this was a living creature like, say, something involving a cryptid, or even, say, something involving a monster, that's where the mystery still remains. Now, one far-off theory that people just started formulating, once they heard from this guy, Tim Davis, that it came from some kind of living creature, people thought, okay, a clear jello-like substance, something that's very light, something that can float through the air when needed, like when propelled. For some reason, people thought, okay, it's a jellyfish, but it's not like a jellyfish that a rare new super form of jellyfish that flies in the air. No, more along the lines, and this is where it gets a little weird, people started thinking towards the Pacific Ocean. The Air Force was doing a set of practice bombing runs, and with those missiles hitting the sea, it propelled probably a school of jellyfish up into the air to land there in Oakville, and that's what consisted of these substances. But what kind of throws this theory off is the fact that the Pacific Ocean, based on the Oakville Blob location, was more than 50 miles away. In fact, it was 50 miles inland, close to the nearest sea of any kind. So you would have to imagine the coincidence of, let's say, the Air Force not just bombing a place, but bombing a place that was teeming with jellyfish, and then these jellyfish not just exploding and dying right there, but rather being propelled based on the explosion up in the air, and then not just falling in that same area, but being propelled 50 miles away and then landing here in Oakville at a place that, again, only houses a couple of hundred people at most. It's just a little too far off, but some locals there in Oakville immediately ran with that theory, and that seems to be the most common response, like that people believe it was something involving naval bombings near a sea of water, and with these jellyfish and how they landed. That seems to be the common theory. Others, though, have gone into a more vague approach. They believe that it still involved the Air Force, but it was something more along the lines of a strange military experiment, maybe something involving testing a biological weapon of sorts, but whatever this test occurred, wherever it occurred, it went into wrong territories, in this case there in Oakville, Washington, and that's where the people were discovering this biological weapon. And the reason why people cite it and claim that it's a biological weapon from the government is because of the way people reacted to it. Remember, a lot of them got ill, violently ill, and when that happened, people started thinking it could only be something involving a biological weapon of sorts. I kind of go with this only because it's a lesser of two evils when it comes to making sense, comparing that to like the jellyfish theory. But who knows, because this incident, the Oakville Blobs incident, only occurred once, and it hasn't occurred anywhere else in the US, or for that matter, as far as I can tell, anywhere else in the world since that time period, more than 20 years later. So just as quickly as they came, whatever these things were, whatever these cryptids were, these Oakville Blobs, they came and they went, and then that was it. There was no other story tied to them. So what do you guys think? The Oakville Blobs, has anyone heard any other items tied to it? Any other tales? Any other experiences? Presumably there are still people there in Oakville or who knows where, but that may still have samples, because those samples that were collected and sent off to the departments, those were the ones that were kept in some kind of ice, and then that way they could stay as is. So anything involving the idea of, like, why not make it permanent? Why not, not have somebody continue to have samples even more than 20 years later? It'd be fascinating to see if somebody really does have that kind of stuff. Another theory that I would throw out is it could be something that I talked about in one of my earliest Cryptids and Monsters video, and that was atmospheric beasts. There were tales of people running into these strange things, almost jelly-like substance items that would follow them or would come across them up in the sky. So could they also be the remnants of these things as they die? If they die, unless they die and float up towards space, they're going to fall to the ground. And who knows, there could have been a school or a team of these things all dying all at once, and they just happened to fall there in Oakville, Washington. So if anyone has any stories tied to that, that'd be fascinating to hear. If it's a little rare, I'm not expecting too many people that can say that they know somebody that experienced this, because again, it's a tiny town over 20 years ago and it only happened once, but hopefully somebody has some info on this. So alright everybody, thanks again as always, take care.